everybody, to the Science of Staying Sound. This is a webinar from Pure Feed, and I'm very excited that there's so many people that have joined us today. Thank you so much for coming on board. For today's webinar, we're looking at the science of staying sound. This is such an important topic for horse owners and riders, whether you're bringing a horse back into work, preparing for the competition season, or just simply looking to maintain your horse's long-term soundness. It's something we all think about all the time. I'm thrilled to be joined by our beautiful expert panel. I say beautiful. Jonty did headbutt a wheelbarrow, so he's looking slightly damaged, but he's still gorgeous in my eyes. And they all bring a wealth of knowledge and experience to this discussion. So I'm just going to introduce everyone one by one. She's very modest. She was like, no, you don't have to add the doctor to my name, but it is Dr. Esther Skelly-Smith, who has many, many letters after her name, far too many for me to read out. But she will be our experienced equine veterinarian today. And Esther has a special interest in sports medicine and rehabilitation. A dear friend of mine, someone I've worked with many times, Jonty Evans, who is, of course, an experienced eventer who's competed at the very top level of the sport, and has a huge focus on teaching others. So he's going to bring some really valuable insights to this discussion. And finally, Lily Chandler, who is a sales and schooling livery owner and a content creator. And I've just been doing some serious Instagram stalking. So I recommend you follow her because she's absolutely brilliant, and has some seriously lovely horses and some foals, by the way, which I'm just very much enjoying, and I want to look at their journey. So thank you so much, guys, for coming on board and talking about the science of staying sound. As horse owners, or even if you just ride in a riding school, wherever you are, this is always something that you should be knowledgeable about. But we've always, all of us can say we've experienced with our horses some degree of lameness. And it's such a relevant topic, especially in the eventing community. Anyone in the eventing community listening, I think everyone's getting their plan in their mind for the year. And it's how you go on preventing these injuries. How can we get them before they even happen? When you start to increase the workload as the competition season is approaching, or your show jumping, or even your dressage season. So Esther, you're going to give us an overview of how increasing the workload needs to be done carefully. And also with this time of year, what are the most common injuries you're seeing? Because everyone's got that eventing season in mind. What is it that, what can be done, and what are the common injuries that you're seeing?
Well, I think, firstly, thank you, and thank you to Pure Feed for having us all on this evening. Looking forward to chatting with you all this evening. I think, from my perspective, I think it's keeping things very simple. When we think about this time of the year, we often forget the basics. And it's very important to take a step back and have a look at where your horse is actually at, and how that horse is looking, and where it is in its training regime. So as you start to increase workload, you have to treat each horse as an individual. So one of the things that I always encourage people is to step back and have a look and see what that horse is actually looking like. How is its top line musculature? How is its feet? Where is it in its nutrition plan? You know, there's lots of things we can look at. How fit is it coming back into work? Some horses will come back into work more fit than others, depending on their breed and type, and the work they're doing and their career. So at this time of the year, it's really taking stock at the basics. You know, starting to take a look at, does your saddle fit when the teeth were last done? You know, some of those basics, like we forget that horses' muscles change shape very regularly. So if you haven't had your saddle checked recently, that can really impinge on how that horse is moving as you start to improve its workload. Similarly, looking at the basics from teeth and feet, has that horse maybe had time with shoes off, and has the feet come back in a different condition than they were before? So you asked me, what am I seeing at this time of the year? I think it really depends on the different fields that those horses are working in. You know, they quite often will find that a horse that maybe is an older horse that has carried a few injuries or has a few underlying issues, and maybe hasn't a strong core at this time of the year, and they're more likely to go on and create more of an issue for themselves or irritate any underlying osteoarthritis or things like that we have going on. Young horses, they don't necessarily have that core strength. They haven't been exposed to that. So you want to bring them on slowly and gradually. So a lot of the injuries I'm probably seeing at the moment is not so much individual types of injuries, it's lack of preparation. It's not looking at your horse to make sure that it's strong and well in itself to move on. And so we are getting those strains and stresses that you wouldn't necessarily expect. Or a problem that has been grumbling from the last season suddenly starts to rear its head as that horse comes back into work.
Because the moment we say the word soundness, we straight away think, don't we, just legs. And that's what we're looking at, isn't it? But what you're saying there is that to keep soundness, you have to, even from the word go, be looking at the whole body.
It's really important to have a look at the whole horse. You know, the back, we often hear a lot about back problems, but the back is a really good indicator as to how the rest of the horse is doing. Because if you're suffering with, for example, the right hock has arthritis, and therefore if you think about how that impacts the rest of the body, we'll use that as an example. That horse is going to offload onto its left fore shoulder, so it's going to avoid using that right hind, and therefore the musculature through the back won't be particularly strong sometimes in a horse that's carrying a chronic injury or an issue. So when we're looking at the horse, if it's well and it has a well-developed top line, that's quite often indicative that that horse is comfortable. Also, we start to look at things that, you know, our behaviours that we would often see with our horses. So one of the things I'll often hear is this horse has come back into work and he's just not the same as he was last season, or he's suddenly not bending as well in one direction, or he's just not behaving as well as he should, or he's being a naughty horse. And quite often those horses aren't naughty, they're demonstrating some form of pain and discomfort. So it's picking those problems up early is really important, because if we can pick those problems up early, we prevent problems further down the season. It helps the horse's welfare, its own way of going, and it also helps you as a rider going into the season ahead.
We're going to go on now to Jonty, but Esther, thank you. So many more questions for you. And also, I've already seen someone has sent a question to the Q&A, which is a great question, which I want to ask now, but I'm going to save it till the end. But if you guys have got any questions, add them to the Q&A, add them to the chats, and we'll work them way through it. But someone's already, like, I've got so many, but we have to talk to everyone, and then we'll start with questions. But Jonty, you're someone who's produced horses to the top of the sport. And as we're saying there, you've got to increase the fitness levels. But first, how do you do it without overdoing it? It must be quite like, oh, I want to get going and let's get cantering, because that's the fun bit.
Yes, it is. Thank you, Jenny, and thank you very much, Pure Feed and everyone, for having me on and having us all involved. It is, of course, you want to do things, and I'm a big believer in the fact that you feel what a horse is like. You don't look. You can look. You can assess. You can do all the book checks, etc. under the sky. But you've got to be able to sit on there and feel how it how it feels to you. How does it cope with canter around the circle? How does it cope with canter around the school? Can it trot around the school? You know, and you will feel how that pace feel, you know, whether it feels strong, whether it feels weaker, and you'll feel it. Esther was saying about his back. You sit on the back. That's the first thing you feel. So, you know, I think the thing that sets us apart with riding horses, whether it be whatever sport it might be, riding a horse, you are riding a living animal, and you've got two brains and two bodies. And so it's your job to feel what you can see, what you can feel. And in terms of fitness, etc., and building horses up, I always felt that a little bit of everything was good. I never felt that too much one thing was going to do any good. And so I'd go and canter around the field. I would go and canter around the school. I would jump a little jump. I would do all sorts of things that are letting horses build up gradually and relatively naturally. I'm not very big into our kind of book type or a scheduled type of fitness plan. I want my horses to be able to carry me and work properly. If I feel they could work around the school or work around the field and trot around the field and trot the lane, all these things, I feel that they're starting to build the strength that we can then go and trot further up the lane or around the field twice or all those things. And so you build things up very gradually. And so you're naturally building its strength, bit by bit.
Yeah, thank you, Jonty. I think, though, what the problem is for some people at maybe other levels is you're so experienced, you can feel when something feels great. Whereas I think some people, I'm a bit like this, I need a plan. I think, if you have but you can't, you've got to be adaptable, aren't you? You can't just stick to that rigid plan because, like you say, they might not be ready to trot to the end of the lane. So you have to be open to that, what you're saying, which is feeling for it, not necessarily having this rigid idea of what the increasing fitness plan should be.
Have your plan in mind, but put yourself on the horse and close your eyes. I didn't mean literally, but close your ears and eyes and have no phone on and nothing to disturb you. And just feel what that horse's walk feels like. Feel what its trot feels like. Feel it in your backside. Feel it in your legs. I know people can feel. So they've just got to let themselves chill out and take a break from life and be with the horse and just understand what's going on.
Take a moment to actually just keep it simple. And yeah, absolutely. So Lily, we're going to bring you in because you are our resident show jumper here. Have you done much eventing? I've only seen show jumping on your stream. Have you done any eventing?
I have. I evented as a teenager, only up to B100, so not quite as impressive as Jonty's level. But I enjoyed eventing on my little Connemara pony, zipping around the cross country and just about keeping a lid on it during the dressage. But
yes,
it was fun.
Amazing. So you're into your show jumping and show jumping still. I think people underestimate how fit jumping horses have to be. How would you say that your fitness approach compares to eventing? Are you seasonal? Are you all year round? And how do you keep your horses? And what's your approach?
I think with show jumping, it's a little harder for people compared to eventing when you have a set event season. With show jumping, like you said, it can be all year round. And I think a lot of people fall into the trap of never really giving their horses a break. And you have to plan your year carefully to, meet the qualifiers you want to get to in the finals without actually running your horse into the ground by having them out jumping, 365 days of the year. So what I do with my show jumpers to keep them fit is that I really think it's important to understand that you don't need to be jumping every week to keep your horse fit. Actually, with most of my show jumping horses, they do very minimal jump training at home. A lot of the training is done with pole work or cavalettis, which minimalizes the strain on their bodies. You don't have to be jumping big fences all the time. Most of the time, these horses know their job. Obviously, it is slightly different when you're working with a young horse, but even then, you don't need to be doing big fences at home all the time to still achieve the same kind of training that you'll need around a course. So I think that's a huge benefit when we're talking about keeping horses sound, is thinking about how much strain we're putting on their bodies day to day and week to week. So you can maintain fitness and build fitness without actually having a heavy amount of strain on your horse. I love to take my horses out for a hack, whether it's 2 or 3 hours of purely just in walk. I've never been a big fan of trotting on the roads because it's quite concussive. I know that might sound a little bit extreme, but I do like to protect them at all costs. So I think thinking about as well, the ground you're riding on can make a huge influence on the soundness of your horse, whether you're riding in deep ground, whether you're riding on hard ground, and the 3 paces can be very concussive. So I think a lot can benefit from just going out walking for hours and hours, up hills, down hills, different terrain. I think people can underestimate actually how helpful that is. So for my show jumpers, they do a mixture of schooling and hacking per week. Sometimes they'll go for weeks and weeks without jumping, yet you can still maintain their fitness ready to go out for your next show.
Oh, you've just opened up a minefield of questions right there. I'm gonna have to bring Esther back in, because and Jonty, actually you a little bit here, because I'm clearly a lot older than you, Lily, and I just remember getting fit for eventing, and it was like trotting on roads would toughen up the legs, would improve the soundness. So I know I'm going a little bit off script here, but I feel like I just want to pull on that little point. And Jonty as well, like Esther, I'll start with you. Trotting on roads for hours on end used to be the thing, didn't it? Like, let's do it and toughen up the legs.
So like that would have been a very traditional way of viewing it. And there's something, let's take a step back here. There's something really important about cross training your horse. So we know that musculoskeletal injuries are much reduced when your horse is exposed to different surfaces. So it's really important that horses don't spend their whole life in the arena. They need to be out on different surfaces and different environments and different times. But the science wouldn't really support for doing much more than 5 minutes to toughen the legs and increase bone density. So no more than 5 minutes is really recommended on the road nowadays. You know, you think about the concussive force going through those joints. You know, we do want to avoid that concussion creating the optimum, basically creating the conditions to create osteoarthritis and impaction injuries and things like that as well. So I think from our perspective, it's making sure that you get out walking and doing what Lily says. You know, that's one of the things that's really important, is plenty of walk, and it's why it's so important to warm up well as well. I'm just going to deepen that thread a wee bit, because if you think about, you hear us all talking about warming up and creating time, and we often get a bit hectic at trying to get on with the work, but we forget that the warm-up is really important. Purely from a science point of view and a musculoskeletal point of view, the reason it's so important is if we think about the fascia and the muscle in a horse. So if you think about muscle, the muscle in a horse, if we think about a steak, when you look at a steak, you see fat and you see the muscle, but you also see this fibrous layer around your steak, and that's your fascia. And the role of fascia is to allow the muscle to rest when it's not being used very rapidly. So it requires less oxygen, and the fascia will firm up to when the horse is resting. So if you go straight in and you go straight into working too quickly, what happens is that fascia is forced to open more quickly than it's ready to. What happens to allow the fascia to open normally is fluid leaks out of the muscle as it starts to expand, and allows that fascia to stretch and expand as we would want to. So it's really important to walk. And so I will encourage a lot of my clients to go for a hack, make it an active walk, make it a useful hack, but I don't want them trotting too much on the roads as well. One other thing I just want to pick up on what Jonty said, and it's really important, and he really nailed it. It's so important to listen to your horse. As a vet, when you come to me or in a general practice, most of us look at horses in a straight line and walk and trot on a straight line and lunge them on a circle. We know from the research that horses demonstrate more subtle problems when ridden. So it's really important for me as a vet to see them ridden, but that's not always possible. So it's so important for me as a vet to hear from you as a rider. You know your horse much better than I will ever know it. Look, you know, you can tell me a lot, you know, it's struggling to bend left, or it's struggling on this particular movement or in this transition. So don't be afraid to tell your vet that as well if you're having a routine checkup or if there's a problem.
And when you say 5 minutes on the road, can I just clarify, is that trotting in when you say?
Yeah, sorry.
Okay,
I wouldn't want too much more than 5 minutes.
I was going to say, it's very hard for anyone to get anywhere these days to a bridle way and only do 5 minutes on the road. So I just wanted to make sure that I was like, oh God, everyone's going to be like, the vet said, I can't. I've got to turn around before I get to my woods.
And that's not to say that you can't do, you know, take them for a long hack and do periods of trotting, but it is giving them plenty of rest and making sure that that's not a huge amount of time during that hack or out on the road.
And while we're with you, Esther, so we were talking about there the differences between, obviously, show jumpers are all year round. For a lot of them, I know a few of them give them holidays. Eventing, some people give them time off. I'm not saying all, because I know Andrew Nicholson never gave his horses a big break in the winter. They didn't have time off. So, and I know Caroline Powell doesn't. So I know there's different things that different people do. But how do you approach the different fitness cycles from a veterinary standpoint, particularly in those horses who kind of have longer breaks or those who have a more intensive periods of training?
I'm going to give you a very unsatisfactory answer. I'm going to say it's down to the individual horse. And I think it's really important to look at the individual horse. You know, it really doesn't matter what discipline you're doing. There's key things we need to be thinking about with every horse. You know, COVID and the pandemic was a really interesting test case for a lot of horses in performance. A lot of them got through out in the field or had their shoes removed or had a lot less work done. And that really suited some and it didn't suit others. You know, some of those young horses benefited from that extra time. Some of the older horses that had underlying issues really struggled to come back. You know, so I think regardless of the discipline, you have to start looking at the individual horse and thinking about what's best for them. Of course, we get different injury types across the different disciplines, but the cores are the same about listening to your horse. We want, when you're increasing an exercise regime, you want to create an environment where the muscle is tired but not overtired. So you have to listen to that horse when it starts to struggle with a particular exercise, or when you've done something well, don't keep going at it. Give that horse a break, allow it time to recover, and then start and work on something different or change in a different area. You know, we can have a very prescriptive plans, but none of them really work across every different discipline. You have to think about where that horse's fitness level is at the moment and what movements and types of movement you're hoping to achieve. Even when a horse is in downtime, there is exercises and things that you can work on to maintain its core. So it could be out in the field and having a complete break, but you could still do some core strengthening exercise, some baited stretches to help maintain, for example, an older horse that doesn't do well when it has had a complete break. And I think, you know, the other thing is we must think about the time budget for a horse. What is that horse doing the other 23 hours of the day out of the 24? That's not just a welfare question we're being asked as an industry. It's actually a basic musculoskeletal thing, because if you sit in the chair or on a sofa 23 hours a day and then you go and try and run in the gym for an hour, it doesn't work. You need that constant movement and you need different forms of exercise to allow you to prevent injury.
Get those 10,000 steps in for your horse a day. That while you were saying about you know, kind of muscle soreness, I'm going off script, sorry. I obviously try and work out, but obviously if you haven't worked out for a few days, you get DOMS, delayed onset muscle soreness. And I've kind of read a few bits, and I've always sworn by the fact that I think horses get DOMS as well. And so I've always said if I've had an intense day of bringing them back, then the next day is a more gentle day, because I think that sometimes they're not, like, they are sore when you ride them because they've done what I would equivalent to a gym session when they've had time off. Am I right in my way of thinking there, Esther?
Absolutely. You know, that's why, you know, same as human athletes, we change the work they're doing on a daily basis. If you were doing the same exercise to exertion every day, that wouldn't allow that muscle to settle and to build. You know, you still have that muscle soreness. As well as being a vet, I'm also a chiropractor, and I often feel horses that have done a day's work the day before, and they will have areas of muscle tightness and restriction that, you know, they've worked hard. And that's not a bad thing, but it's how we manage it and changing your different exercises to suit that horse on a different day.
Yeah, and I suppose some people could think that as it might come out even as a lameness, where it is just a general, I worked very hard yesterday. And also, can I just say, a chiropractor as well, you are an overachiever.
Can I interrupt, please?
Yes, do.
So you mentioned that Esther mentioned the physical side of work, etc. But you've got to remember the mental side of it. When the horse has worked hard, you know, for example, when I was eventing art at the highest level, we'd go galloping. We'd come back from galloping. We hacked the gallops. We hacked back. So it was a long hack there, good long hack there, and galloped and hacked, long hack back. So there is no way that, and he was then lunged in the afternoon gently, and he had magnetic rugs on and all sorts of treatments. So that I don't believe that he was that muscularly tired the next day, but I generally wouldn't ask him to work again the next day. Just because I wanted to feel happy. I don't want to pummel the daylights out of their mind, you know. They've got to want to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. And they don't want you to see you coming and go, ugh, Jonty's
Exactly.
coming again. This is going to be rubbish.
Here comes that long fella.
It's really true, Jonty, in so many ways, because if you think about how we view welfare, looking at the 5 domains model and how the mental, the environment, physical, everything feeds into the mental well-being of that horse. And I think we know now around learning theory that horses benefit from working in different ways and in different formats. You and I wouldn't like to do the same thing day in, day out and have a really hard time. We do need rest, and horses need the same.
I would quite often, when I was working lots of horses at a decent level, I would quite often work a couple of them on a particular thing, maybe on the flat work side of things in the school or poles, etc. So I wanted to get a message across. I wanted to get the task learned, as it were. So I might even do 2 or 3 days on the bounce on that thing. Then when I achieved it, I pat the horse and it wouldn't come to school again for a couple of days, because I just want to go hacking and have fun, enjoy itself, be a horse.
Yeah. Lily, we're going to bring you in at this point because you have so many horses coming into your yard. I even see that some of the horses that come into your yard don't leave because you then buy them. But your sales and training livery, how do you, when you get that horse first in, assess its kind of fitness and its soundness levels? Do you have a kind of program, or what's your, because they're coming into you and people have expectations, they want results, they want you to come on, well, I've got this in for sale, money, come on, let's get. So what's your kind of process?
I think that's a really interesting question, because what I find with a lot of owners, not all of them, some can be absolutely great, but a lot of them want results now. They want the horse sold tomorrow, and they want the horse to be performing incredibly, and then they'll mention, oh, by the way, it's had 2 months off. Okay, so we can't go out jumping tomorrow, unfortunately. We have to build them up slowly. So when I've got lots of different horses coming through my yard, I normally perform a 2 to 3 week assessment period on a new horse. Whether this is a sales or schooling livery, I tend to follow the same pattern. When it's a sales horse, it's also partially me getting to know the horse, putting them in different situations to find out what they're like, so I can advertise them accordingly. And with schooling liveries, it's also to assess their fitness. Whether, for another reason I get horses in on schooling livery a lot of the time is because they've gone a little bit sour in the arena. So it's also assessing what that horse needs to do in particular, especially at the start of our time together, if we need to reset the mind a bit, if we need to crack on with work. So I do like to ask owners lots of questions about their horses, and during that couple of week period, I try and do as many different activities with them as possible. I take them out hacking, I work them in the arena, sometimes I just walk them around the farm, and during all of that time period, you can kind of assess a horse's level of fitness based on how they're coping with the work I'm presenting them with. And there's no set thing I do with each horse, as every horse comes in with a different level of fitness, a different issue per se, or if some horses, for example, have just been absolutely schooled to death for months on end, and they just come and I just say to the owner, right, we need to do a couple of weeks of hacking, this horse just needs to decompress a little bit so we can actually then move forward with our work. I think a lot of people get caught in the trap of wanting to work this horse, we need to solve this problem. Whereas actually, if you overload them a little bit too much, they can throw the towel in and go, actually, I've had enough of this now. So a lot of the time I am saying to people, let's just have a couple of weeks of downtime. And it brings me back to what I was saying about the hacking, is I try and assure people that don't worry, your horse isn't going to lose fitness from just having a week or two of walking out on a hack. It is remarkable how much they can maintain just by doing that. But when I'm having lots of different horses come through my yard, obviously I'll get young horses through the yard, older horses. Like Esther was saying earlier, a 5-year-old compared to a 15-year-old, I do have to manage them very differently. So with my young horses, I don't like to ride them every day. I try to set up a system of an every other day working them. Sometimes we'll do a few days, like Jonty said, if I want to really nail down on an exercise, I'll do a few days in a row focusing on that particular thing, and then give them a couple of days off, a couple of days of hacking. Whereas with an older horse, I find a little bit more consistency can benefit them. Especially one of my horses, he's 15 now, and where he has a little bit of arthritis in his hocks and stifles, he's actually doesn't do particularly well with completely no time off. I like to give him downtime, I like to give him light work periods, but actually giving him that complete gap of work entirely tends to stiffen him up a bit. So it's very different depending on the individual horse, their age, what they've done previously. A lot of people will send young horses in that have done a lot leading up to the time they've come to me. So I like to give them a few weeks of decompression time, a bit of hacking, just to let them chill out a bit. And some come to me very, very green, straight out the field, just about had tack on, and then off we go. So it's also managing people's expectations as well, to not rush the horse, to build up their fitness slowly. And a lot of the time people want results, especially if they're wanting to sell a horse. But like we said, we have to build them up slowly, because you're more likely to do an injury by rushing that horse and overextending the muscles than if you gradually guide them into it. So it is finding that balance, especially with lots of different types of horses coming through the yard, sport horses, cobs, ponies, literally anything and everything. But at the end of the day, I think the principle is quite the same with all of them. I think we can sometimes be a little overprotective of our sport horses, whereas actually any horse can do an injury. Cobs can do injuries, contrary to popular belief. They're not indestructible. And I think that we need to be treating every horse like an athlete, whether they are a competition horse or your standard all-rounder.
Yeah, I think that's so interesting, because I mean, a lot of people listening to this might be like, well, Jonty rides who's a super posh pony, and mine is a Connemara or a cob, but I think exactly that. You have to treat each one with the respect they deserve, whether they're just going for a prelim or going round to the Olympics. I think there is that level has to be the same principle, and understanding your horse. And do you find that quite hard then? I mean, it sounds like you have to manage people's expectations more than the horses, Lily.
I think the joy of having them in on my yard is I'm in control of the work they're doing. Whereas a lot of the time, I think it's easy for people when they aren't with the horse day to day to have a slight disconnect. When you're experiencing riding the horse day to day, you're very in tune with their fitness and their mental state and how they feel towards their work, and that can help you set the pace. Whereas I think when you're just receiving updates through the phone and you're watching videos, it can kind of give like almost a rose-tinted view of that horse. And I try to, send the highlights of my session to the owners. But at the end of the day, there are, bits that we don't get on video and bits we're working through behind the scenes. And the most important thing, especially if you've got a young horse, is not to rush them and not to jump in head first. I mean, even if your horse is going very well and the temptation to maybe move up a level is there, they're jumping really well, they're finding this height really easy. We also need to, like Jonty said, remember that it's not just their physical state you have to think about, it's also their mental state.
So I suppose the $1 million question is, you're obviously always monitoring their fitness, but how do you know when a horse is ready? How like you're saying it's about mental wellness and all these things. How do you know, right, when do we press the go button?
I think that's a really hard question to answer, because I agree with the fact that you can just feel it, but I do totally appreciate there will be people out there that perhaps don't feel it and they need something to, be the defining factor as to when that horse is ready. And I think the best thing to do is to go ahead and give things a try within reason. I think it's always a safe bet. If you think your horse is ready for something, but you're not sure, perhaps start with the level below that, what you were aiming for, and gradually guide them in. And if they do that quite comfortably, then perhaps you're then ready to move up. I think it's always better to start at a slightly lower level or a slightly, lesser length of time for working them than perhaps you may think they can do, because then you'll never overdo it at that point. If you do it and then you find, they found that quite easy, okay, we can now think about stepping up, increasing the workload. Like we've said, it's all important about doing it gradually, but I think it's always great to err on the side of caution, but you won't know until you try. So I think if you're not getting that feeling, you're going to have to get on and do it and see how it goes.
Esther, while Lily was talking there, I could see you nodding away. You were like, yes, I like what she's saying. And I think what was really interesting as well, like she's that importance of not making every horse wear the same hat, and every horse should, like a cob from a thoroughbred. It's just equally as important to monitor all of their fitness and whatever they're doing.
Absolutely. And I think, you know, from the Pony and Pony Club right through to the Olympic horse, they all are athletes in a different way, you know, from the ladies hacking pony to right through, you know. So I think they are athletes and they need to be treated like it in their own context. You know, there is lots of things we can do around heart rate monitors and monitoring fitness from the physical and recovery and things like that. And those are really important tools, particularly, you know, in the sports where we need them to be fitter, very fit, in fact, to take us around a cross-country course and things like that. Those are really useful tools. But as Jonty said, taking the mental side and listening to that horse is so important. I think one of the things that's really important is to get a good team around you as well. You know, the vet, the physio, the chiro, the farrier are hugely important. You know, your dentist, saddler, you know, and all those professionals working together is really important. When we get the best results for horses is when people are working together as a team. You know, the other professions have just as much value as me as a vet. We all bring something to the table. And I think that's when you get the most for individual horses as they are working through their fitness programs. You know, I think we cannot give you, I can't look at a horse or I can't have an example of a horse, 14-year-old horse doing so many hours a week in work and be able to tell you whether that horse is ready to go and do its job. You need to look at that horse from its physical fitness, either how the rider's feeling it, how it's recovering, all of those things worked in together.
So I'm going to throw this at you then. Are there any specific red flags that owners should look for as they increase the workflow? And what's the best way to catch any problems early?
Yeah, so from a veterinary perspective, I want to pick up I'm in my job dealing mostly with musculoskeletal issues and musculoskeletal pain. So we need to pick up those aversion behaviors that we used to think were naughty. You know, sometimes a horse can be confused or it's struggling with a particular exercise. But when you have repeated aversions when the horse is being ridden, that's one of the red flags. For me, if we look at what's been done in the research around the whole horse ethogram, I don't know if any of you are familiar with it on the program. My old boss, Dr. Sue Dyson, created this ethogram, which is the over 20 behaviors that indicate when you have 8 or more of those behaviors consistently that you maybe have a horse that has pain and discomfort or musculoskeletal pain. You know, and those include everything from opening the mouth repeatedly, tail swishing, change of diagonals, how the face is shaped. Believe it or not, horses really do have pain face. You and I, if we are suffering discomfort, we grimace our face. Horses do exactly the same. So learning to observe your horse, you know, does it have really pinched nostrils in pictures, or if somebody's videoing you, is the eye more almond shaped and nice and open and round? And it's when those things are repeated, you know, if you constantly have a horse that's swishing its tail or it's struggling to engage correctly in canter, all those wee subtle signs are really important. Equally, signs from the horse of, you know, in the stable. Is it not liking being girthed up? Does it walk away when you come into the stable? You know, those are subtle signs that historically we would have said that's a naughty pony or that's a naughty horse. Quite often that horse is telling us things. I don't think I have come across in my career a bad horse. I think it's often we're not listening or there's confusion there. I don't know, Jonty and Lily, you've probably come across that as well yourselves, that we find the horse is not as comfortable or there's something going on, you notice yourselves when they're being ridden.
Yes, I just want to I want to tell you a story, short story.
Excellent. I'm getting comfy.
So earlier you said, somebody said something about Jonty riding arts and being a big smart about the horse, and then someone's cob. Well, just out of interest, I used to call Art, when Art made me cross, which she did sometimes, I'd call him, I'd say, don't be naughty, you stupid Irish cob. So I used to call him Irish cob all the time. Anyway, but sorry, you have to repeat your question now, Esther. I've forgotten it.
No, I'm just saying, you know, if I'm picking up, or owners are picking up these signals where the horse has changed in its way and going, or if you're consistently having a problem, that's the time to go and speak to your vet, rather than wait until the horse is obviously lame or until you have a big problem. If we can pick these problems up earlier, is kind of the ideal.
I think bearing that in mind, that people say they can't do X, they need a vet, they can't do Y, they can't recognize it. If they can recognize it, they're just not believing they can. They can just sit there. If the horse won't go down the drive, or if the horse is rolling its eyes, etc., or it's bad to stack up, etc., they've just got to be honest with themselves and, you know, accept things are going on and recognize them.
And one thing I would just say to that, Jonty, which is really important, is, as I mentioned it before, I classically will look at your horse without a saddle on it in a straight line. But if you're having a problem under saddle, that's when you actually want to be catching the problem, not when I can see it in a straight line or on the lunge. So, and if somebody isn't listening to you, or some of the professionals, because like, we're all busy, we're all rushing about, and we sometimes, owners will come with a problem and we can't see it. You need to make the professional you're working with say, wait, there is something going on here. I know there's something going on, and not be afraid to advocate for your horse as well. I think that's really important, and that's kind of what you're saying as well.
Yeah, totally.
I always know that. Oh, sorry, go Lily, go.
To add into that just quickly, I had a very similar situation recently. I've got an older horse who's quite an experienced show jumper, and at one show I was at, he stopped at a fence, which may not be a big deal to a lot of people. Horses are allowed to stop sometimes, but for him that's drastically out of character. So immediately I thought, oh, something's not right, he's not happy. And the first vet we saw, we trotted him up, did a whole workup. He said, no, he's completely sound, he's absolutely fine, crack on. I said, no, there's definitely something not right. He never ever stops. He would only ever stop if something's really bothering him. And we carried on. We got a second opinion, and it was still at the point where no one was really seeing anything. It was purely just what I was feeling under saddle, and I did have that moment of questioning of, am I just overthinking this a bit too much? You know, maybe he just didn't like the look of that fence, and you know, I'm just being way too paranoid about this. But I just said to them, I said, can we just do a quick scan of some things just to check? I know he's sound, I know everyone's telling me he's okay, can we just check? And we ended up scanning his back, and he had an absolutely massive soft tissue injury all down his back, which is quite bizarre to me, that he was trotting up sound, you know, really not showing any signs of discomfort apart from that one little instance at a show. But I'm really, really glad that I listened to my gut feeling there, knowing that he wasn't quite right, because obviously I don't blame the vets at all, because he's trotting up sound, he looks sound in a circle, on a hard circle, in a straight line, flexion test, we did the whole shebang. And you know, for them there was absolutely nothing visible there, but I'm really grateful to that one vet that really listened to me when I was saying, no, I can feel it under saddle, I know we can't see it, but I can feel that something's not right. So I think, like Esther said, it's really helpful to have that team of people. And you know, as the rider, there will be certain things that only you can feel. A vet can only do so much with what they can see on the ground. Like, a huge part of our job is also relaying how we feel the horse is feeling to our vets, to our team, to help either find the problem or prevent the problem.
Because I'm right in saying, aren't I, Esther, that horses want to cover it up. They're historically, they're meant to be eaten by other animals. So their job is to try and not be the weak one that's picked off at the back of the herd, isn't it? So they are trying to hide it a lot of the time.
Absolutely. They're a flight animal by nature, you know, and when they truly demonstrate it to us is when they are really struggling. You know, I think that's the key to think. And the other thing we'll often hear based on that is, but they can still jump and they can still do this. but actually adrenaline is an amazing painkiller. So when they're in a stressful situation and the adrenaline is up, that horse is able to cope with an awful lot more than when it's more relaxed and in its home environment. So it's why we need to be so conscious as well. When we do go somewhere to have a horse assessed, you need to give it time to relax and settle into the environment as well, because sometimes they'll come out and they'll do this most amazing trot around a lunge circle or around the arena the first time, and you go, there's really nothing wrong here. And it's
tail
not
up snorting.
Yeah, tail up snorting, looking amazing. It's not until you let that adrenaline rush come down that that horse can truly demonstrate what's going on with it.
I thought it was very interesting. A lot of the horses I've worked with in the past have been rescues, and a lot of the dogs I work with, I'm going somewhere, are rescues. And you can never tell how a dog or a horse or any animal is going to be until they decompress. And I thought what Lily was saying about how she gets horses in and lets them decompress first before she does anything with them, I think is really, really interesting, because am I right in saying, Esther, the science behind it is letting the cortisol levels drop down, and you can't really tell if a horse is sound or anything until they've decompressed. It was just very interesting to hear how you do that before you even look at what they're going to be like as a sales horse or at schooling. And I just thought that was such an amazing terminology, and it fits so well with this, because you can't tell their sound or anything or fit until that decompression's gone. That's how I've always done it, and I'm guessing it's so interesting hearing Lily doing the same, Esther.
Absolutely. I think it's really important, from a physiological point of view. They can hide a multitude of sins. Equally, a professional rider can hide a multitude of sins as well, and the good rider will balance a horse and make them, more relaxed. So one of the things I quite often say to my clients is, okay, just let this be a bit more relaxed. I don't need you putting it in that particular frame or way of going. Just let it relax so I can observe if there's anything going on as well. We know from the research about 60% of those more subtle lamenesses only show up when ridden. So that's why it's really important that those horses are seen where you can. I know that's not always possible, but if you're having a ridden problem, make sure they're ridden as well.
Yeah, so interesting. Jonty, coming back to you, obviously you've trained a lot of horses over your time, and I'm guessing you're always looking for that consistency in your training. Do you have any specific fitness tests or tools to track your progress? Is it, you were talking about going on feel, but is that do you use anything else to track the horse's fitness?
I haven't done. I've had various things. We've had heart monitors. We've had all sorts of things that are either given to us or we're told to use, etc. And I generally haven't gone with them, because when we were at Manor Farm, we were working on horses all up Kim Bailey's gallops. So I knew if they went up there easily 3 times and were working hard every time, they were 4-star fit, sorry. And so we then tweak fitness by things like raised poles and so on, because I'm a firm believer that fitness is about strength, and it's very quick, and people can be very quick to make sure they're aerobically fit, but not always very quick to make sure they're muscularly fit and strong. And so I would generally know that if they've gone up Kim's gallops well, at which stage I was at. Also, something you were saying earlier about understanding where your fitness was and whether you were able to move on to the next level, for example. One of my big rules of thumb has always been that I need to do the level below easily. So if I go to an event and I've done a minimum amount, so maybe I've done 4 BE100s and the horse absolutely cruises around a 5th one, I think to myself, it's jumped to double clear, it's come back, it's trotted back to lorry, and it's hardly broken sweat. And that's how I want it to feel before it then goes on to its novice, because I feel that's really easily done. I don't believe anyone can't feel that. And if they're honest with themselves about whether the horse has enjoyed it and found it easy, and to actually ask themselves, just quietly on your own, driving home later on, and you ask yourself, has the horse enjoyed it? Has it found it easy? And if you answer yourself honestly, yes, it has, then I'd say you might be ready. Go and try the next level. See what happens.
Can I, because I'm guessing you're teaching all levels of rider now, Jonty. Am I correct in that?
Yeah.
So I do see a lot on social media, people who are competing 80 centimeters, 90 centimeters, and they're out on the gallops a couple of times a week, and they're getting their horses fit, ready for, well, Tweezle Downs normally at the beginning of the season. I'm in Canada now, so I'm guessing it's still probably early on. And I feel like social media is like everyone can see what everyone's doing now. Whereas when I was eventing, I was like, if I've got something going for 80 or 90 and just having a first time out, I'd be like, it's schooling is probably going to get enough to get it fit. What's your, you've just talked about getting them out on the gallops of a 3-star, 4-star. How much do you think they need to be doing for that lower level? Do you think they need to be going out and galloping and doing tracks and?
Oh my God, now I can't believe you're asking me that. I'm not convinced that horses need to be going at the gallops at that level. No, I'd be far happier to see them go for a good hack and have a canter around the field somewhere and be able to canter uphill, downhill, and do all these things. I'm really happy to see everyone agreed on not trotting on roads, because I'm big on that. I've never been big on trotting on roads. Trots up the odd slope, but wouldn't even hardly ever, never trot on flat or downhill. No way. But in terms of mixed surfaces, I would want my young horse, for example, doing 100 or 90 or whatever. I'd want it to be able to canter around the field and just go and have fun, and enjoy itself. I'm not a bit. I wouldn't have been a big one for the gallops at that level with the horses. They were generally doing enough work in the school, doing hacking well enough. All these things. I don't think the gallops are that necessary at that point. But he's shut down. So
you were nodding to that, Lily. Would you agree that some people have this kind of idea that almost going the other way and trying to get them too fit, and coming in, you must get some horses in that are kind of a bit buzzing and ready to go around badminton and probably not at that level?
Yeah. I think, especially with your amateur riders, I think a lot of us can overcompensate sometimes when an event feels like a big deal to us. You can get it in your head to over prepare the horse. When you're jumping young horses a lot, like for example, when I'm taking, a 4-year-old out to its first show, I don't need them to be super fit, because, they're only going to jump one class. They're going for a good experience. They're schooling a few times a week beforehand. I don't need to feel that they need to be ultimate fitness, super strong, could go and, jump 10 rounds. We don't need that level of fitness. Whereas perhaps for somebody that doesn't compete as often, it's a big deal for them and their horse, and they want to feel really, really prepared and ready for it. Again, I think that's more of a mental thing than it is a physical. I think people perhaps, I wouldn't say overwork their horses, but overcompensate is probably the better word. Thinking that, just because they happy hack day to day, that's not going to keep their horse fit enough if they want to go and do a BE event on the weekend. When actually, if they're happy hacking through the week, the horse probably is fit enough. They probably are. If they're hacking, over different terrain, up and down hills, walking out for hours, I think, like we said before, people don't realise how much that can benefit your horse's fitness. I don't think it does them any harm for, the odd trip up the gallops. But yeah, for your lower level eventing, or even show jumping or whatever you're doing with your horse, I think that it can more be a rider thing than thinking, right, we have to get prepared for this. Whereas when you're a professional doing it day in and day out, it's just another Sunday. There's no pressure, there's no panic. The horse is all right. Whereas a lot of with your amateur riders, it might be their first time doing BE or first time going eventing, and they want to feel super prepared and that their horse is super fit for it. So I can understand why people would kind of fall into that habit of, right, this is our regime for the week leading up to our first BE event. But I think a lot of the time, you might miss actually how fit your horse really is just from doing the regular things day to day.
Sorry, Jonty.
You probably also get some horses where it's easier if they're tired halfway around.
Yes. Mine.
I've ridden plenty. That's I think to myself, thank goodness it's tired. Well, that makes it mentally much happier.
Yeah, I always used to enjoy if there was a tricky combination, if it was at the top of a hill. Yes, yeah. Thank you very much for putting that there, lovely course designer. Well, speaking of which, though, Jonty, you obviously had Art, who was fit, Olympic fit, and now he's got to be dressage fit. How have you adapted what you do with him and to keep him sound and happy and ready for his workload now?
Him lots. No, I'm not allowed to say things like that. We have the only thing that's changed massively is that the kind of work he does now, that we don't really involve any galloping, any cantering big time like that. There's no need. He hacks a lot. We've got amazing hacking where we are, so he hacks a lot up and down hills, and goes off trotting and wherever, you know, all over the place. But other than that, he doesn't. He's also got an inevitable. Esther will correct me if I'm wrong. Surely horses keep a residual fitness.
They definitely have some degree of muscle memory, like, you know, especially. And I think there's definitely some horses that keep themselves better than others. I think there's just to pick up on what both of you have said, Lily, you were talking about, you know, not overdoing them. And Jonty, you said something earlier about musculoskeletal fitness rather than cardiovascular fitness. And I think that's something we're not very good at recognizing the difference in. I think we find that owners, you know, I find a balance in that. There's sometimes people will be very focused on their cardiovascular fitness and they'll be fit to go up with gallops, but actually that horse isn't strong enough to do a particular movement in a dressage test, and therefore it's putting itself at much higher risk of an injury than if you had taken time. One thing I want to ask both of you is how long, both of you, Lily and Jonty, how much time do you actually take off the horse's back? Do you do much groundwork in between? Because one of the things I like to get my clients to do, if they can, particularly in young horses, is to take a couple of sessions in groundwork a week to allow that horse to use its back in an appropriate way. Because we're sometimes so focused on being on peak fitness and doing the perfect thing under saddle, but sometimes that horse needs to learn it from the ground without the added weight of a rider on top of it. I just would be interested in both of your views on that.
I'll go first, Lily. Hard luck. Other than lunging, I haven't done any beforehand. I've lunged the horse. Generally, when my horses were getting fit, they were doing their work in the morning, whether it be cantering or whether it be in school, etc. And they would often lunge over poles or raised poles in the afternoon. And so other than that, I didn't do any groundwork. But my partner at the moment, who's just walked past the room, past the back of the computer, by the way, to fill up a wine glass, I have to remind you, let everyone know. She does lots of groundwork, and she's a big exponent of what you just said. So she walked past me nodding just then. So I am learning a lot more about it now. I haven't done before, I'm afraid.
And Lily, how do you fit it in?
Yeah, so I do actually do quite a bit of groundwork, especially with youngsters. And funnily enough, actually, with my much older horse as well. With the youngsters, I like to do very similar lunging over poles. I like to involve poles most of the time when doing groundwork, whether I'm long reining or lunging them. I think with young horses, I like to do more long reining because it more replicates, you know, the sort of aids you'd be using under saddle. But also with my older horse, where he has some slight arthritis in his hocks and stifles, I actually avoid lunging him at all costs because the tight circle is not beneficial for him. So I like to long rein him a lot, lots of straight lines, and again over poles, even if it's just raised poles and walk. He's quite a sucker for having a lazy core. He's great when I'm riding him under saddle and I'm scooping him up and holding him together, but when he stands, he kind of stands you know, like with his shoulders back and his tummy to the floor, and you know, you scratch under his belly to make him lift his back and suddenly he goes woo. But he doesn't hold himself like that all the time. So those sorts of exercises are actually really helpful for him. I like to just call him a bit lazy, but he's just got quite a weak core for a horse that, you know, competes to a decent level. Actually, focusing on those basics, I think, is one of the, you know, most beneficial things for him, because like I said, when I'm on him, actually, he holds his core up very well, but I'm only on him for perhaps an hour a day. The rest of the day he's stood like this, completely sunken down to the floor. So I like to actually try and encourage him to lift his core up himself without me being on him and doing half the work for him. So I love to do a bit of the groundwork, especially with two of my homebreds as well. They're only 2 and 3 years old, but again, it's going back to that mental state as well, doing some groundwork with them, introducing them to certain levels of work without putting any pressure on them at that age. I back my horses and not until they're 4 years old. I know everybody does it differently, but I like to do quite a bit of groundwork leading up to that point. So as 2-3-year-olds, they do bits and pieces, they do a bit of long reining, they do a bit of in-hand walking over poles, and I think it's actually, you know, surprisingly beneficial. Again, going back to the fitness thing, you don't always have to be working your horse really hard to help strengthen their muscles and develop their fitness.
Esther, can I ask you a question? Because my next question for you is, what do these different fitness plans look for with different horses? But the first part of that I would love to know the answer to is, so Lily's obviously planning ahead with these youngsters and going to bring them into their first ever time being fit at 4. And then you might have an event horse that's coming back, having had it 6 months to a year off, maybe from injury or a long extended time period off. You were talking about muscle memory. Should you be creating, obviously, how different is the getting a horse fit to the first time to refitting a horse, because obviously a horse who's done it before, how different is that? How do the muscles react, and what should you be thinking about?
I think it varies from horse to horse. You know, I think with a young horse that hasn't been exposed to it, I think it's really important to take that time. I think we all think in time frames of like 4 weeks, 6 weeks. We're looking at months here. You know, I think one of the things to bear in mind is to do this consistently and slowly, we need to learn to take our time, you know, and we won't go from from lack of fitness at day 0 to perfect fitness in 4 weeks. You know, it's about building that time in. So young horses take longer because they haven't ever built that muscle to that level before. Equally, they have better, or in theory, they are not meant to have any musculoskeletal injuries, and they are able to build muscle quicker than a horse that is a bit older and has carries a few issues along the line. So it really depends on the individual horse. And I think you need to look at, you know, those older horses that have, some of them can quite easily get fit to where they were before, but it's actually when you look to step up a level with them, you know, that's when you need to take a bit more time as well. You know, a fitness to do an endurance ride is very different than a 3-day event, and very different for a dressage test, and how you create a plan around that will be very different for the individual. But one of the core things that I think is really important is taking your time, doing lots of pole work. Every horse will benefit from racehorse through, will benefit from pole work, not spending loads of time going around in circles, but keeping a lot of straight lines. Horses aren't really designed to go in a circle. If you think about how the pelvis is built, you know, it puts strain on the sacroiliac joints and down through the legs. So the more you spend straight lines, and then when they're strong enough, moving on to more circular movements, I think it's really important. But you have to think about what the fitness level you need is, and is that a cardiovascular fitness or is that a muscular fitness? When it comes to muscular fitness, one of the things, and it's not a set in stone rule, but when I'm rehabbing a horse or bringing it back to fitness, I have this rule about the rule of 5s. Horses don't work on 7 days a week. We have to think about what we've done in each session. So we'll split the things up as they go through the week. They might be hacking one day, or they'll do certain exercises in another day. But if you're doing a period of, for example, groundwork, you should do the same thing roughly 5 times over, you know, well, regardless of that's 5 times over 2 weeks or 1 week. You should aim to do the 5, in my head, something 5 times, whether it be the intensity, whether that be the difficulty, or whether that be the length of time you're doing it for. So if you're doing a set of poles flat on the ground, for example, I wouldn't necessarily raise those poles. I might increase the number of times we do those poles before I would move on to raising them and things like that. So in my head, there's a bit of a golden rule of 5. Don't think that's overly scientific, but it seems to work. And Jonty and Lily, you might have other suggestions about how soon you move on, but it's that repetition of the same. So, you know, if you're only doing poles 3 times a week, you'll do 3 sessions in that week at the same intensity and 2 in the next week. Don't be fooled into thinking everything's on a 7-day cycle.
So before we move on to, we have so many questions, and I can see we've been going for an hour and a half already. And I want to make sure, because I think a lot of our final bits in our script are actually going to be answered by some of the brilliant questions that we've been sent. So I really want to get to those. I can see people will be like, oh, what, am I going to get it in before I have to go off? But before we move on to people's questions, I think we do have to talk about diet and the role that that plays in a horse's workload. It's so important. Can I just say, I have fed pure feed for years. Not now because I'm in Canada and my horse still lives in England. But I've always fed pure feed. I just found the simplicity of it and how to do it was just utterly, for a simpleton like myself, was utterly brilliant. But I'm guessing the feed plays a crucial role in workload and when we're increasing it. And this is for you, Esther. Sorry. Oh, Elsie, sorry. There we go. I said Esther, not Elsie. And I was like, there's too many E's in my life. Elsie.
Yeah, no, don't worry. So yeah, feed is a massive kind of consideration, you know, day to day in any horse's life. Looking, you know, just at the grass they're eating and the hay and the haylage they're eating. It's a massive part of their day. Obviously, before we talk about fitness, you know, horses have evolved to have this very kind of system where they have to have grass or have something being eaten throughout their day. They're not designed to have these long periods of time where they're not eating, which is when sometimes competitions or training kind of take them away from what they're naturally designed to kind of do. So I think that's always quite an important consideration, is when you're going to go and have these competitions or increase in fitness, is to start considering, you know, where the diet is going to play a role in that. And when I like to think about it in, you know, kind of 4 different kind of pillars of diet, really, of what we're looking to kind of fulfill with their feed. So I kind of consider it in terms of your energy and your calories. Then you're kind of looking at your muscle support and feeding from muscles. And then I like to do it in terms of hydration, which is something entirely separate, but still plays a role in diet. And then also gut health, I think, is actually its own separate individual thing that really needs to be taken into consideration. And I would say over the last kind of 5 years, people have started to really sit there and kind of look at what the science has been telling us, look at what the research is telling us, and then putting it into practice for themselves. So if we kind of look at, you know, the first pillar being energy and calorie, it does really make sense, you know, if your workload is increasing for the majority of the horse population, the energy requirement and calorie requirement is also going to increase. Obviously, that's not applicable for every horse, because every horse has different metabolic systems and rates. For example, I know some horses that can go around 4 styles on just a balancer and a lot of hay, whereas some horses can't go around, you know, a 90 centimetre without quite a lot going in them. So I tend to look at it in terms of where the horse is going to get their energy from as well. Are we looking at a horse that can thrive really well and really consistently off something like fibre and oil, which I think the majority of horses can, and I think it's the best way to feed naturally. But then sometimes you do have these horses that do need to have a fast release energy from the sugar and starch in their diet, and that's when you need to kind of consider things like oats that are high in fibre and less sugary. I know from us personally, I always tend to look at things like working or our condition mix when you're starting to increase up the calorie levels. And then also if you had a horse that you were really needing a little bit more from them, something like our performance feed is a great thing to have in there. It's really high in fibre, but it does have that quick release energy. And And then if we kind of look at the next pillar being our muscle support, obviously muscle support starts with anything in terms of things high in protein. Anything like linseed is a really good thing to kind of have in your horse's diet. It's a really great way to get that fatty acid content in, the omega-3s. And then if we're looking at anything that needs kind of muscle support, so if you're moving up the levels, perhaps you're doing a harder workout, anything with antioxidants in is a really kind of crucial part of the horse's diet. Things like vitamin E, selenium, vitamin C are all antioxidants. And what that means is when the horse is exercising and the muscle is stressed, they actually release something called a free radical. It's oxidative stress. And what that means is when you're feeding a feed high in antioxidants, you're basically putting in the ingredients to help kind of repair the muscle, decrease the stress on the muscle. And then if you then move on to the next pillar being hydration, funnily enough, that does come under diet and feed, even though it doesn't sound like it should. Obviously, the more the horse is working, the more it sweats. You're losing really important things like electrolytes, you're losing fluid. So it's really important, you know, to find out how you can get your horse to drink. I know when I'm on the phones and when I'm at yards, the things I get the most, you know, is my horse is at a competition and he won't eat, he won't drink. I don't really know what to do. You know, he's not performing as well as he should. And that's because he isn't hydrated. He's missing crucial elements from his diet. So I know there's quite a lot of different ways of kind of looking at that hydration level. A lot of people like to feed things like apple juice. People like to add in kind of apples into their like everyday like water bucket to try and increase like apple bobbing. I know that's quite a common one I see on Facebook all the time. But I think number one of the easiest things you can do is just wet their normal ration down quite a lot. Whatever you're feeding, get that quite soaked. And if the horse is willing to eat that, that's quite a good way of doing it. Or looking at something like a recovery mash. I know from us, we have a very low in sugar and starch recovery mash that has all those kind of recovery ingredients already pre-mixed in. So you aren't having to faff about with electrolytes. You're not having to faff about with those antioxidants or anything. It's there ready to go. And I find, you know, feeding a little mash like that can be quite exciting. And then I think the other thing that I tend to then look at would be the gut health. So any horse, you know, has a microbiome, and that is a population of bacteria that exists that basically ferments the feed. It's how horses get their energy. And often what happens if the horse is stressed, you know, if they've gone to a competition, if they've gone to a training event, or if they've traveled, they might not look particularly stressed, but what is going on in their gut can be something entirely different. It can really disrupt the natural balance that they've got going on. So anyway, feeding something really high in fiber already combats that stress because you're providing a feed that naturally suits the horse's gut's microbiome. But then feeding something additionally like a supplement, like a pre and probiotic, a gut balancer is a great way of also naturally supporting that gut microbiome, keeping it happy, supporting the environment in which it kind of thrives. The great thing with pure feed is all of our feeds already contain a pre and probiotic. There's no need to kind of add that in. You aren't having to faff about. They've already got a live yeast in there, which is great for horses who are traveling often. Again, with our refuel mash, that already has a pre and probiotic pre-mixed in. So again, if your horse has got a bit stressed or they've gone to a competition, it's a great way to kind of just naturally support them. Obviously, one of the things we talk about a lot with horses' diets is making changes really, really gradually. You know, if you're going to be going from a competition diet down to a normal diet, you have to make those changes quite slowly. But the great thing with pure feed is because we do include all the same ingredients in all of our feeds across the range, from our very, very low calorie to our very, very high performance feeds, is we include everything the same. All we do is switch and swap kind of percentages from very, very low calorie feeds and the very, very high calories. So it means if you're going from, you know, one day you're needing a lot of energy, you can be at the very, very top of our calorie in the condition mix kind of area. And then the next day when they've got a day off and perhaps they're a real good doer, you can switch them right back down again. And I think that for the most riders is like a really good asset to have in your toolbox. The amount of times I have people on the phone saying, oh my gosh, I need more energy, I need this, but I need it for a very, very short amount of time. And then the horse is a great doer, so I don't want them on something high calorie all the time. It's constant. And I think that's because the most the amateur rider doesn't have the horse that does sustain itself off very little. So I think that's quite a handy thing to have if you're going, to a one-day event, if you're going to a riding club, is the ability to make changes quite quickly without upsetting the gut.
I found with my horse, who was, you look at him and you think there's not an inch of thoroughbred in him, and then you rode him and realised he was complete thoroughbred and utter tool. But he competed, he was ready to go intermediate on just working. And I don't know what you guys, maybe Lily and Jonty, can do some comparisons, but I always think it's quite nice for people to have an example of how, because obviously the fitter he got, the more crazy he got. So his breeding meant that he didn't have to go up in the feeds. But like you say, it was so nice to know that I could just so simply, without even ringing you guys, just move him up in the feed. I don't know about you, Lily. Have you got some examples of like different ones that you feed them? So but yes, working was brilliant, and I compete. But he didn't have to be on performance, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, I mean, like Elise said, it's so helpful to be able to make those changes quickly. I've got a horse that's very, very sensitive in the gut. Even something like the grass sugars changing can offset his very predisposition to ulcers. So he requires some quite careful management. Yet when we, for example, want to head to a stay-away show, when we're going to be doing perhaps 4 days of jumping in a row, they're going to need a little bit more support with their energy compared to, their day-to-day work in the week. So it's really easy for me to put them onto a higher calorie feed for that short period and then bring them off it when they come home without upsetting his gut, which is very sensitive, and causing any problems for me at home, because when his gut's upset, he's also very angry. So that's never good for me. But it's really nice to see. And I mean, he's a horse that I've struggled quite a bit with to find the right food for him, with the fact that he's so sensitive, yet also sometimes needing a high intake of calories when we're going to do a few days jumping in a row, and he's going to be under quite a lot of pressure in quite a lot of work, and it's so nice that Pure Feed have the option where actually, like she said, all of the ingredients are the same. It's just the percentages that are changing. So when you need that little bit more energy, you can swap them straight onto it without having to, over weeks and weeks, gradually change their food in advance. You can just swap them onto it for that short period and then bring them off again for not needing the extra energy at home when I'm just schooling day to day to keep myself safe as a rider.
I know. We all want to stay safe, don't we, Jonty? And I'm guessing for you as well, finding that balance sometimes, especially with the horses you've had to get fit in your time. I find sometimes the crazy kind of relationship is directly proportional to how fit they are.
Without doubt, definitely. And like you said, already alluded to, the more thoroughbred they are, the more they can be, a handful. And being able to control that diet is so easy. I love the fact that you open the bag and it's whichever feed it is, whether it's condition or whether it's competition or whether it's whichever feed it might be, they all look the same. So they're all basically chuff based. And so I tip that. It gives me a feel good factor as I tip the bag into the bin, because I love feeding my horse that food, because I know what's doing it to its guts. So the whole thing is so much easier. And I wasn't as involved with Pure Feeds when I had a big string of horses running. And I wish I had been, because it would have made life so much easier being able to chop and change like that.
Yeah, it's something I've always said. I mean, I ran big yards in Ireland for a long time, but one of the things that when I had my horse and I was trusting him with other people on livery yards was they couldn't get it wrong. If I was feeding Pure Feed, it didn't matter what they were doing. If they fed him a bit too much or a bit, it didn't matter. Like I've always felt like they couldn't muck it up. Yeah. Which for me was such a reassuring thing. I know that sounds like but if you are getting a horse ready for a competition, you don't want them suddenly having one scoop of too many of that and one scoop less of this or whatever. If you can keep it simple for people looking after your horse, it makes life a lot easier. Right, I'm going to make us go on to questions because we've got so many good ones. Do you want me to decide who I throw the question at, or do someone want to offer to take it when I've read it out?
You decide.
I've got
Bring more.
the control. Elsie, are you happy if we move on to questions? Are you? Yes, good. Right. Oh, there's so many. I'm going to throw this one at Esther. What are the less common signs of pain that are often overlooked? I think that's a great question.
That is a really good question. I think one of the things we have to recognize is that a lot of horses, and you touched on this earlier, shut down. So actually one of the lesser known or thought about ones is actually a reluctance to go forward, a reluctance to be free and active in their movement. And I think, you know, this lazy horse is quite often overlooked as a horse that's lacking energy and feed it more and all of these things. And actually sometimes when a horse is uncomfortable, they simply just don't want to go forward. We sort of touched on the things earlier. Go and have a look at the pain ethogram. Learn how to recognize your horse's pain, facial pain and discomfort. But things like struggling in a particular direction all the time in the same rein with a particular movement, or, you know, you always find that horse weaker on one side than the other. You know, those are things, as long as you as a rider aren't creating that problem, because quite often riders have aches and pains and discomforts and imbalances, and we have to bear that in mind. But for me, one of the most commonly, definitely the most commonly ignored factor is that horse is unwilling to go forward. Equally, if they start rushing. And so, you know, that fast, fuzzy, not, you know, suddenly wanting to go quicker, or, you know, over when they're jumping, they're rushing their fences a wee bit more, you know, things like that. You know, common signs of pain, there's lots of them. I think one of the best things we can actually do is learn to observe our horses and know what's normal for them. And when there's a change, notice that change, not a specific sign, but look at what the change is in a horse. I don't know about the rest of you, but that would be what I would be saying to you.
I always knew when my horse's hocks needed doing is when he was spooking and tried to put me in a bush. So, what about you, Lily? What do you look out for that people might not know about, that might mean your horse isn't feeling that great?
Yeah, I think I really agree with what Esther said. I mean, there's so often that I'll get a horse in the arena for schooling, and, you know, the main complaints are, oh, he's so stuffy, you know, he doesn't want to go forward, he's lazy, like have to ride him in spurs and a whip all the time. And I think you sometimes need to consider that, you know, there's always two factors: their mental state, perhaps the horse is a bit sour, perhaps they've had enough of this, and maybe the reason why they're sour is because they're slightly uncomfortable somewhere, or the fact that there is something bothering that horse. Because a lot of the time I found with working with lots of different types of horses, you rarely meet a horse that doesn't want to try for you, and there's often a reason as to why they don't want to. And more often than not all the time, but more often than not, it is a discomfort situation. And I think, again, what Esther said, you know, when I'm jumping a horse, you can kind of pick up on little things like, you know, for example, I had one horse in particular who would switch leads right before a fence onto the same lead every single time. And at first you could, you know, consider that it's perhaps a weakness thing. And then it started to develop as to switching leads behind and going disunited in the canter. And at that point, I knew there was definitely something causing discomfort. But it's little things like that, or perhaps leaning on one rein. A lot of the time, if there is a weakness somewhere, if you catch it early enough, it's not going to develop into a problem. Whereas if they are weak somewhere and start overcompensating somewhere else, that's sometimes where you can find yourself finding these problems that, you know, perhaps could have been avoided earlier on. And it's hard for some people to notice these things, because I think a lot of riders blame themselves for problems. You know, oh, I just rode it terrible, that's why he rushed into that fence, and, you know, he's picking up the wrong lead all the time because I'm not, you know, giving the right signals. And I think it's trying to find that fine line of assessing, you know, what influence you have as a rider and your own biomechanics and balance, but also perhaps considering that it's not always your fault. Perhaps the horse is struggling with something, perhaps there is something stopping them from being able to do this particular thing, and that's when we need to start assessing, you know, where the discomfort's coming from. Sometimes, you know, you can find exactly where it's coming from. Sometimes there's a little something, but actually that's been caused by something else. And, you know, things go hand in hand together. So, for example, my horse, when he needs his SI doing, he goes quite stiff down in his hocks and stifles, and they're all connected and they all offset each other. So when one's a bit sore, everything's sore. And, you know, if you leave it too late, then everything's sore and needs doing. So I think everything's connected. And, you know, a lot of the time, sometimes you can see a bit of lameness in front that's actually coming from discomfort in the back or an ill-fitting saddle. And there's so many factors with horses that you have to consider: your tack, your dentistry, your physio, the soundness. You know, it feels like sometimes you can be a little bit overwhelmed with the amount of things you have to keep track of to, you know, make sure your horse is feeling their best. But like we've said before, it's all about the feel. It's all about noticing these slight changes and not overlooking a change in behavior. I think with horses, like we've said before, there isn't such thing as a bad horse. I don't believe horses can truly be naughty. I think a lot of these tiny changes in behaviors people are missing, and that's when it develops into a bigger problem, as opposed to, you know, when you look back, you go, oh, actually, I do remember there being slightly something different there. And if I look back a bit further, actually, there was something different there. And I think when we actually sit down and look at it all, the majority of the time when your horse is perhaps acting out or something, there's usually a reason. Like we've said, I truly don't believe there's such thing as a bad horse. You know, 9 times out of 10 there's discomfort somewhere, or they're struggling with something mentally. And I think it's down to us as the riders and owners to be able to help them and pick up on those things.
Wow, I think we covered most of that. But Jonty, for you, is there any less common signs of pain that people could look out for?
Horses are creatures of habit, and so they will do what they do normally. So when you feel a change, there's normally something going on.
Look at that. Said like an absolute pro.
Right.
Love it. That's such a good, we should frame that, put it in yards everywhere. That just as a sentence. So I'm going to start here with Jonty. Oh, I've got a good one for this, actually. What would be your tips for building up a stronger core in a young horse?
Oh, good Lord. There's a book full.
Give us one. Give us a golden nugget. We'll go round.
I think what we've been using a little bit lately is the bands. So we've used the bands a little bit. And you might do your groundwork in them, you might do your lunging work in them, you might even ride in them. And so I tend to think, well, it's not doing any harm. So it might not do any good, but I don't know. But it's not doing any harm, so I'll have a go with that. And like I've said, I do a lot of raised poles, whether it be canter or trot. And I want horses to be able to carry themselves and over the poles, and I just want, I'm big into, I want the work to be easy. I might have to work, I might have to do something with the horse, might have to bend its neck, might have to move it around, etc. I might have to leg guard it, but I want it to be easy fundamentally. So I'm very lucky and honoured in that I've been able to ride Art, and when Art does things well, he does them with such ease. And so that's been one of the things that I've learned most from Art, is how easy things can feel. You know, you shouldn't be able to go around the Olympic course and it feel easy. And you shouldn't be able to go around a big show jump track and it feel easy, or a difficult exercise in school and it feel easy. But he can make it feel easy. And I applied that to a lot of horses. And if they can make it feel easy, you're getting the work right.
That's great. Lily, what would your be tips for building a core in a younger horse?
Oh, I feel like I'm sounding like a broken record at this point, but I really, really love to take them out hacking. I think with young horses, I like to do small, intense periods of working in the arena. But a lot of the time, I don't like to overcook them. I like them to digest what they've learned. And I think when you're going out hacking and, you know, your hill work is such a beneficial thing. Like I said before, I mostly hack out and walk. Occasionally when, you know, we've got the right sort of setup, we can go for a little canter out on the turf. But most of the time I'm doing my hacking and walks, so I love to be going up hills, and I love to do a little bit of schooling with them when I'm out hacking, just doing a little bit of flexion, getting them moving around, even just in the walk. And I think when you're working your horse correctly, they're using their core. And even if it is just in walk, if you have them working correctly, lifting through their back, you're working that muscle. And again, it goes back to not overdoing them. You don't need to be out galloping all the time or jumping big fences and doing lots of grid work all the time. But then in the arena, for example, I am very similar. I love my raised poles. I love doing pole work. I love lengthening and shortening the strides for the pole work to get them, you know, adjusting their bodies, holding themselves together. I think it can all be really helpful.
And Esther, I'll throw the same question to you. Building up core.
I'm not going to repeat the excellent comments that have been said. I think one of the things that I think across everybody needs to get better at doing is doing on ground stretches and baited stretches and work. So if we look at some of the work done by Professor Hilary Clayton, looking at the carrot stretches as we'd know them, the baited stretches, we know we can build top line musculature and core strength within 3 months if that's all they did, and by 1.5 to 2 centimeters in the multifidus muscle on average. So if you just did those consistently in the correct format, that alone can be helpful, as long as you don't have a neck problem or, you know, a reason that horse shouldn't do it. So I think actually we need to get better at actually doing some work in the stable after they come back and doing your stretches. If you look up Hilary Clayton's papers, they show you nicely how to do them, and there's some ways you want to avoid doing them, which we can't demonstrate on a webinar. Just to pick up on something Jonty said, I'm a big fan of the bands. You know, I'm not a big fan of gadgets, but I do like them. Now, the bands that I use are the ones, the Equicore Concept ones, because we find that they are the ones that actually have the research to show that they do what they say on the tin. Because there is, if you find all the different types of bands, there's a big difference between the rubber and the tension and where they're placed on the horse. They can do harm if you have a horse, for example, with a stifle injury where the band is moving or they're not using themselves appropriately. So they do need used with care, but certainly abdominal muscle, you know, the one front of the abdominal muscles is particularly safe in most cases. But I would just check the type of bands you're using, because I do think that there is a big variance across, and there's a big price variance as well. But I would definitely go for the ones that have the research behind them as well. One other thing I think we do need to say, and I think Elise, she really highlighted it, and we probably haven't talked enough as a trio about, is the importance of nutrition in building core. They do need the protein and the energy. They need the building blocks there to be able to build muscle. So we can do all this work, but if they don't have the appropriate nutrition, it's like trying to build muscle on lettuce leaves or in Mars bar squares. It doesn't work. So we need the appropriate diet as well.
I'm just going to ask Elise, do Pure Feed still do the treats, the amazing bags of treats, which are really affordable? So just because we were talking about the other 23 hours in a day where they're not working, I used to use the treat balls, and those treats fit brilliantly in them. And I just always that treat ball was going the whole time, head down, playing with it. And he was always, because he was so long, working his back. And I used the treats for the carrot stretches because he used to be quite good and not take my hand off. Caveat. But yeah, I loved those treats. And he literally always had a bag by his box and was always just smashing those in. I don't know if that was the best thing to be doing, but it seemed to look for him and make him stretch his back. So that was my little Pure Feed top tip. We only have 9 minutes left. I'm going to ask this one to his best Pure Feed for excitable competition horses. Oh, you're on mute. Oh, there we go. Oh, no, we can't hear you. What's happened? Well, you have to do it through the medium of dance. We can't hear you. You might have to save that one and write it in a caption for me, and I'll read it out. We've lost your audio. Okay, who can do a quick? We'll do a quick fire one. Lily, for a horse who hasn't jumped in 5 months from a winter break, how would you reintroduce show jumping? You have a minute to give me your answer.
Gosh, okay. Well, I think every horse is different. Some horses can handle those breaks away with a lovely, sane and level head, and some horses certainly do not. I think you can build them up gradually. Start with poles, start with little cavalettis, maybe start with your safety cross pole for your first fence back, and just judge it on how your horse is feeling. Don't throw them in the deep end for your safety and theirs. And yeah, take your time. Start with small fences. Keep yourself safe. If your horse you think is going to throw a fly back after the fence, sit up. And take it. I think it goes back to the same thing. Take it nice and easy. Be gradual with it, and don't rush.
Yeah, don't look for don't fight fires. Look for the sparks. So keep everything slow and steady. Okay, Esther, what are your thoughts on getting a horse vetted before returning to work?
So there's positives and negatives. So if you have a subtle issue when that horse is not in work, you don't see it. So quite often I'll tell people to keep a horse in work before it comes to see me. Equally, if you have a known issue, or if you just want to see where that horse is at to give you an idea of some exercises or some areas of concern and weakness, that's a good time to go and see the vet before you bring it back in. Probably not for a 5-stage vetting, but just an overview. And there's a lot as a team we can work together to do.
One of the best things.
I'm going to answer Lisa's question if she can't. Can you hear me spoke? Can you speak yet? No. I think the most of the feed range can be fed to an excitable event horse or competition horse, because they're pretty much all low sugar, low starch. So that's to give the answer in case she doesn't come back.
One of the best.
Oh yay, you're back.
Perfect. I was going to say, so yeah, the whole pure feed range, apart from our competition feed, is all cereal free. They're all really low sugar and starch, molasses free. So anything basically from our range, the best way to kind of pick your pure feed is off of weight, whether they're a good doer or a poor doer. If they were, a real excitable horse that holds their weight really well, pure easy. If you have an excitable horse that's actually a bit of a stress head and drops off really quickly, condition mix. So it's super duper simple. And then if you wanted to have a bit more of a personalized feeding plan, we do have on our website a free diet plan service where you just pop in all your details, and then you'll get sent a report the next day basically, of what we would recommend kind of and how much we should feed basically of our pure feed. It's also today, if you do recommend in the end of the diet plan that you heard about us on the webinar, you will get a £5 off voucher. So
you're doing my job for me now, reading out. Brilliant. Very quickly, Esther, I was told by a very amazing farrier that he always recommended getting x-rays of feet when you first get a horse or when a horse is young, because that is actually for a farrier very useful on the soundness, having that comparison. You're nodding. Is that something you would agree to, that a little bit of expense is then worth it? Yeah,
so how the hoof capsule and how the bones fit into the hoof capsule is two different things, how it looks to us externally. So if it is very much worth the expense of doing that, particularly working with your farrier and your vet together, because we can correct negative palmar angles and different things that you won't see purely by looking at the horse from the outside. So good farriers will do a good job without x-rays, but equally it does add to a level of care.
Yeah, I always thought that was just like a little bit of a light bulb moment when someone told me that. Jonty, are you ready for your quick fire question? You have 1 minute to answer.
I want to add something to that, please.
Oh, sorry.
Our vets have done a reduction in the amount it costs for they did a day where they did just foot balance x-rays. So I think you approach your vets. If you've got 2 or 3 people who will, maybe your vets will do that.
Like a group one.
Yeah, a better price for it. Anyway, sorry.
I think it's a great idea. First, final hill work, Jonty. Which is the most beneficial pace going uphill for a dressage horse?
Trotting.
Trotting. There we go. Quick. Nice, to the point. Right, there are more questions on there. I don't know, maybe there's a way that you could send them to us and we can answer them, so you can post them on social media or something like that. Thank you so much. We could literally probably carry on for another hour. I think it's just so interesting. There's so much to talk about. I know that this is going to, if anyone tuned in late, get posted where? On
so it will
Instagram?
be, yeah, there'll be a recording link that gets sent out to everybody to be able to watch it back, and then people who didn't make it today or maybe had to cut out halfway through will also be able to watch it back, and then it'll go on all the socials as well. So
and if you're based in Ireland, don't forget you can purchase Pure Feed through SVS, where Esther and her team can help you choose the right feed for your horse. And if you take a Pure Feed diet plan and reference this webinar, you'll receive a £5 off code on your next order. Did I get that right? Yes. But I want to say a huge thank you to our three speakers. So knowledgeable, so much fun, but also just I think my main takeaway from it, as a pure muggle in the riding world, is just to just listen to your horse, feel, get advice, and make sure that and also keep enjoying them as well. Don't panic. Yeah, it's really important to enjoy it. But thank you so much, guys. Oh, there's lots of chats coming through. Oh, there's lots of this has been so interesting. Thank you so much. Another chat says, thank you. You've been super helpful for a person and a horse coming back from work into injury. Someone else has said, thank you very much. Thank you guys for tuning in and listening. And guys, thank you. It was absolutely brilliant. And yeah, I'm sure if anyone's got any questions, everyone's open to answering things on their own social media. So get in touch. But yeah,
Bye.
thank you very much.
Bye. Bye.
Thank you.